Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kirsch.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
And we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast.
We take from the thousands of business books out there and test the author's ideas by comparing them to real-world challenges. With over 40 years of projects between us, we've got quite a bit to compare against. We give you the condensed takeaways, followed by our review with the authors.
We know you want actions, not theories, and it's actions that we want to help shape, because that's what the Wicked Podcast is all about, helping you to become a wicked company.
Jingle bells, jingle bells. Well, maybe it was jingle bells. It was jingle bells when we recorded this, but it's not jingle bells anymore, is it?
No, well, not when we go live, but it's now the, 21st, I think?
Four more sleeps until Christmas. That's why.
Hey! Yeah, and 5 more sleeps to my birthday.
Now that's an important date. That's a bigger important date.
Yeah.
But anyway, enough about Christmas, enough about your birthday. You know, people do care about that, but not today. Who are we talking to?
Yeah, let's talk about books. So today we have Jack Uldrich with us and his book, Business as Unusual. A very quick read, but a very quotable read with a lot of interesting insights around, new mindsets and sort of things we should consider. But before I dive into my side of things, what did you take away from it? What kind of actions would you propose to people?
So I think one of my favorite questions I got to ask him was, okay, yes, the rate of change is increasing and the rate of change is exponential and getting worse, but people are not necessarily willing to kind of go along at the same rate. And he said, yes, technology is changing, lots of changes happening, but people aren't. So we need to find the right way to bring people along for the ride. He also made a really interesting insight when he said that change used to be considered to be progress, and change is not necessarily considered progress. So in order for leaders to help communities, help customers, help teams, even have more senior leadership understand this rate of change is to bring it back and make it real, put it in the right framing on how it's going to benefit everyone and move in the right direction. The other one was with the ocean of information that's coming in, whether it's through social media, digital channels, audio channels, podcasts or vlogcasts like ours, how do you deal with that? And he said leaders should have, and I agree with it completely, a 15-minute closed door policy just to contemplate and to think, to deal with their poverty of attention. So I think those were two really good insights that I would be more than happy to recommend to my clients. But what about you?
Well, that sounds like a great action. Should we take 15 minutes, I would say nothing, and just have everyone think a bit? Haha. No, joking. But I think there's something where what I took away is, and I think I might, for the first time, disagree with you kindly on one aspect around, change is not progress. I think there's some progress in change and insights and learning iteratively every day. So I think, I would like to rather describe it as, every day we learn something, every day we do something different, because as human beings, we always do that. And I think organizations often prevent us from doing so. And I think, therefore, we might become more human-centric companies and organizations just by acknowledging that, you know what, let's improve something every day. Let's try something a little bit every day. That gets me then to my main insight, which is so a quote of his is if you have 14 new platforms, you're not going to have 14 new opportunities in business. You have a few million because of the exponential intertwined networking that you can do between those platforms. And he described it with Uber of using, cloud and mobile phone and commoditizing people's cars. So there's a lot of different things that came together. And, one of those ways to bring this together was Uber. So, if you think about it, you might have had 1,000 permutations or 1,000 options there to test. And probably a lot of people in some companies actually tried that. Because I remember a company like Halo, which was a earlier than Uber cab company that sort of tried it in the same way and wasn't quite right and failed. And it was just another experiment. So for me, it's really that. If you look at it and you imagine as a business leader, which is probably very relatable to say, there's a million things out there to do. Which ones are the ones that make us better? Well, you better start experimenting. And experiment by small incremental lots of things. Try to do 1,000 a month and don't go as far as building everything, just try it in different ways. So that for me is that insight, where when you really look at the numbers and you say, look, there are a million things for you to test as an organization, then you have to start experimenting. There's just no other way, an other sustainable way into the future to try this. And I think that's the change I see, to navigate your way into the wicked problem where you're positioned as a company, and say, this is where we sit, this is what we're solving, these are the things, and then we try a bit more and see how we can ingrain ourselves better and better into this uncertainty, and make a few things slightly more certain. And that's what customer will approve. So start experimenting heavily and set yourself up for that, is my definite insight there.
Marcus, I hear the chorus in the background. They're going to start singing my favorite Christmas song. Do you know my favorite Christmas song?
I don't know that yet. Please tell me.
Grandma got run over by a reindeer. I'm waiting for them to start playing that. Yes, Grandma got run over
that
by
exists.
a reindeer walking home from our house Christmas Eve. And this is not a singing show, so why don't we go to the interview?
Yeah, let's not think about Grandma. Let's go. Let's go to the interview, please. Hello, everyone. Today we're here with Jack Uldrich. Hello, Jack, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, as usual, we'd like to start at the top, which means would like to know, please tell us a bit more about who you are, Jack, and why you wrote the book.
Yeah, I'm a futurist. In the UK, we're known as futurologists. But from my perspective, what I do is I like to use the acronym AHA. And what it stands for is awareness, humility, and action. I make people aware of how fast the world is changing. Next, we all need humility to the idea that what served us well yesterday might not work in the future. But the only way to predict the future is to create it ourselves. And to do that, we have to take action. So that's the final A in the acronym. But I wrote the book because it is not one particular technological trend, cultural, political, that is the greatest change out there. It is the rate of change itself. It is accelerating. In many cases, it's growing exponentially. And that's really what I wanted to wake readers up to, is to that reality.
That's great. Yeah. Well, I think this year we've seen more change than usual. And a lot of change has happened without us maybe wanting to do it. And I think in our experience, in our work, we often see that it's really, really hard for organizations, especially bigger ones, to change, shift their mindset and do something different. So, so by experience, organizations don't change easily. However, this year we saw a bit of a different kind of pace. So businesses can change quickly when needed. But in your experience, or why do you think, why does it take half a society to crash for business to change at the pace that we saw at places this year?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that there's a wonderful quote from John Maynard Keynes, and years ago he said, "Society tells us it is better to fail conventionally than to succeed unconventionally." I want you to think about that quote again. I mean, most people would rather fail conventionally, doing what they've always done, than risk doing something new. And the reason I think that is, it's almost an evolutionary reason. I mean, in the past, the world has always been changing, but the rate of change was quite slow. And so caution was actually rewarded. The big paradigm shift today is that the rate of change is now accelerating, and caution, doing what you've always done, is actually going to get punished. And so this really requires people to embrace the uns, what I call, is like explore the unknown, embrace uncertainty, learn how to unlearn, get comfortable being uncomfortable. But from my perspective, it's almost an evolutionary reason why people don't change quickly.
There was another quote that said, only in a crisis, real or imagined, can real change occur. And it's in those moments, it's the ideas that are lying around which get adopted. How do you see that kind of playing out with regard to the rate of change?
Yeah, well, I guess if I could tie it back to what we've seen in the pandemic, I mean, one of the great lessons is that we can change a lot faster than people expect. I mean, how fast we transition to remote working, to online education, to telemedicine. And e-commerce has actually, to me, this is one of the most powerful statistics coming out of the pandemic, is that e-commerce was already a trend. It was growing. It's been growing for the last 10 years. But in the first 2 full months of the pandemic, April and May, e-commerce grew as much in those 2 months as it had in the last 10 years. I mean, that is, to me, remarkable. And so the lesson that I take is there's all of this opportunity inherent in change, but again, most people don't want to change because they want to keep doing what they've always done.
Yeah, and I think even when we then look at not just the change that actually has been happening or still is also happening this year, it also seems that a lot of times change is often try to be applied around delivery things happen. Whereas when you look at the leadership level, there's often similar things sticking around for longer, which often has to do with either politics or sometimes, the business model being hard to be let go. But these days we need to have change that happens on every level, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, or if what your notion towards that is. But for the leadership itself, is there something we can do, or what have you seen around mindset change in leadership and what can be done and how that can be addressed a bit more appropriately?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that leaders can do is embrace this idea that they don't have to have the answer. I think the world is changing so fast on so many different fronts, and many of these trends are converging with one another in unexpected ways and then leading to social, cultural, political, economic change, that it is impossible for anyone to have the answer as to what the future holds. But it is incumbent upon leaders to ask better questions about the future. And I think what leaders can then do within their organization is actually have some humility and acknowledge they don't have the answer, but to say, look, it's incumbent upon all of us to figure out, are we asking the best question? And if not the best question, because we're never entirely sure that is the best question, at least a better question. I think if you look at all of the businesses that went bankrupt in the last decade, and I like to just start with the letter B, Blockbuster, Borders, BlackBerry, they were all led by smart people with well-motivated teams and C-suites, but they were answering the wrong question. They didn't understand either how their customer was changing, how their business model was changing, how their competitors were shifting, or how technology was shifting. And sometimes it was a combination of those. And so I think if they would have spent more time with questions, they would have been better off. The next part of this is everyone says they want to be an innovative company and they want to create an innovative culture. That's wonderful. But innovation by its very nature entails risk. And risk by its very nature entails failure at some level. Not everything is going to work. And so I think the next important thing for leaders to do is really reframe failure not as something bad, but as a learning mechanism. And I guess I have a lot of examples about this, but I'll just stop talking and we'll keep asking questions.
I mean, I think that it's a real common theme, this whole idea of reframing what it means not to succeed. Is it failure? Is it learning? Is it experience? What is it? And part of that is also setting expectations.
Yeah. So the story I wanted to tell is, and I just came across this in an article last week, so I don't include it in my book. 10 years ago, the United States government, President Obama, commissioned a Blue Ribbon Commission to study what would it take to get us back to the moon. And the question then focused on what would it cost to create heavy lift rockets. And this Blue Ribbon Commission said, well, it's going to take 12 years and $36 billion. Fair enough. However, Elon Musk, an entrepreneur, did it in 6 years at a cost of $1 billion. I want to just break that down. So a single company, individual, did it 50% faster at a fraction of the cost. But the story, and maybe you saw this, Elon Musk, a number of his Falcon rockets have exploded, and there was one recently. And of course he doesn't like that, but he actually recognizes that that's the price of innovation. And he says, look, that wasn't a failure. We have to learn from this, but it's by learning from his mistakes that he's been able to drive down the cost. And so I think that leaders of the future actually have to embrace that sort of mentality, that the price of doing business in many cases is failure, and you have to embrace that. And it's really uncomfortable thing to do. And as I say in my book, the riskiest thing to do in today's rapidly changing environment is play it safe. Do what you've always done. The safest thing to do is to take some risk. I'm not just saying risk for the sake of risk. Be strategic, be thoughtful about it, but you have to iterate, experiment, and fail your way into the future.
So one of the things
sorry.
One of the things that I'm really interested in this whole kind of failure thing is short-term versus long-term. So in that really, really good example of what Elon Musk was able to do, he had a long-term kind of view of things. I think a lot of publicly traded corporations and even some privately held corporations are focused on the next quarter's numbers. That's the only thing they can think about. And if they're going to hit the numbers, they're going to have to play it safe, because if they make a mistake, if they take a risk and it doesn't work, it might be 2, 3, 4 quarters before they can get kind of back on track. How can people in leadership encourage their shareholders, their teams, their other leadership to take more of a long-term horizon in looking at things?
I did not include this example in my book. I just came across it about 4 weeks ago. The CEO of Daimler just said, in the next 5 years, we have to get smaller. Now, you would think that that quote would actually send investors fleeing for the doors. But it was so unusual, I'm like, what does he mean? And he said, look, the world is moving towards electrification of automobiles. It's just a reality that an internal combustion automobile requires 1,200 parts, electric vehicle about 200. So we're actually going to need fewer workers. But he was taking a long-term perspective. He said, look, this is a really good thing, because electrification, if we're a leader in it, this is going to position us very, very well for the long term. And so from my perspective, that to me is what business leaders need to be doing. They need to be taking a good hard look at these long-term trends, and if necessary, get smaller. One of the unusual things that business leaders are going to have to embrace is that quarterly success is not as important as survivability. The long-term goal is to survive, and if you need to get smaller to do that, that's what you have to do. You might have to get into an entirely new business. You might have to fundamentally change your business model. You might have to go after entirely new markets and entirely new customers. And I think if you actually look at the companies that have been around for a really long time, they've always taken a long-term perspective.
Yeah, and I think if we stick around the failure things, so apart from that, we see it from a trend. We had 1 or 2 conversations, if not more, over some of the episodes on, do we maybe need another language? Because if you're looking at design thinking and some of the other human-centered research that looks at problems and says, right, if we're looking at wicked problems, we need to understand the problem better. To understand the problem better, we have to become better learning organizations. In order to do that, we need to be able to fail. But actually, every failure is finding something that potentially doesn't work and actually therefore shows us where we need to look next. So there's some value in all of these. But the other part, and I found that really, really great, and as a quote in your book, you talked about, I think, if there's 14 new platforms tomorrow or today, you're not going to have 14 more options to explore. You're going to have like a few million or something, because everything's exponential, right? So if you have that, then you'll have to try a lot of things. Let's say, 1 million things over the next 10 years, because you're going to have to figure out which things are for you and which things sort of where you will end up as a positioning after those 10 years, because you will wiggle your way through it. And I find it really, really a great quote. So tell us a bit more about these exponential aspects, because I think one is about the failure, but you also talk a bit about, to apply 10 times of success to the business, which is sounding a lot like these exponential aspects as well. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I actually want to go back to the first part of your question.
Yes.
It's the convergence of all of these technologies. There are 14 different and probably even more sort of technological platforms: the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, robotics, 3D printing, nanotechnology, biotechnology, blockchain technology. And so I think the best way to understand this is through stories and analogies. And I point this out in my book. I think that 15 years ago, most people, the idea of strangers giving strangers rides in their car would have seemed insane. Most of us in the US, at least, were growing up, our mothers told us never get into a car with a stranger. Well, today, Uber and Lyft are powerful platforms. But if you really sort of unpack what made Uber and Lyft successful, it was a convergence of three technologies. It was GPS satellite technology converging with the smartphone technology, converging with cloud computing. And they were able to take those three to create a platform that allowed people to essentially commoditize their automobiles and for people to find riders in them. And I think the challenge of the future is going to be this exact same thing. It is going to be a convergence of a lot of different technologies. And let me just give you a concrete, specific example of this. A year ago, 2 years ago, I was out at the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas, and Amazon announced their new smart toilet. And people poo-pooed the idea. They said, who needs a toilet that just flushes itself without you having to touch the handle? Well, in today's world of the pandemic, suddenly that product looks a little more attractive. But I say to my readers and my clients, I go, that's not their long-term goal. My guess is, and I don't have inside knowledge of this, they're going to put sensor technology into those toilets. And when you and I do our business in the morning, there are biomarkers in our urine, in our stool, that tell us that we might be about to get sick, that we might have coronavirus, that we might be pre-diabetic, that we might even have a particular type of cancer. They are going to figure out how to use the toilet to make money, keeping you and I healthy in the first place. And it is a convergence of the toilet, sensor technology, artificial intelligence, and 5G technology that allow that new crazy business model to emerge. And this is where business leaders really need to start thinking unusual. I mean, play around with the convergence of these technologies. And I'll tell you, the few that I think you absolutely should be putting on your radar screen are artificial intelligence, blockchain technology, 5G, and the Internet of Things. We can put sensors virtually anywhere. Artificial intelligence is going to transform every industry. Blockchain, if you don't know what it is, start doing your homework on this. It is an incredibly disruptive technology, and it has a hell of a lot more to do with the world than just Bitcoin and digital cryptocurrencies. That the convergence of those technologies, I think, are going to transform every industry and business model, and it's both frightening and incredibly exciting.
Yeah, I've been doing blockchain consultancy for the last 3 years. So,
Oh, you have?
yes. So it's looking at blockchain and the convergence of AI and 5G and IoT and blockchain. I couldn't agree with you. Couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, I just think some of the things that it's going to allow in real estate transactions, fractional ownership, the idea that in the near future, renewable energy is going to continue to drop in price, and in not too distant future, I think I'm going to be producing my own energy. But if I have excess energy using blockchain technology, I might be able to sell it to my next door neighbor, or I might be able to gift it to a nonprofit in my community via blockchain technology. This is where it's going to get really disruptive. And so I'm sure you've had experts who are a lot more knowledgeable than I am on this, but I'm really excited. But it does require today's business leaders to begin thinking and preparing for a very unusual future.
It does require them to kind of get ready for it. So we're always happy when people like you kind of put blockchain out there as something that they should kind of get stuck into.
Yeah.
I've got a different question, but it's one of those sort of related questions. There are so many things that leaders should be paying attention to, so many different trends and emerging technologies. And there's practically an ocean of information coming at us from all the different media channels, whether it's broadcast television, Netflix, social media, or podcasts and video blogs like we're doing now. There's, as you put in the book, a poverty of attention. There's only so much energy that I can put into critical thinking. What can business leaders do to filter this flood of information and decide where to apply their limited resource of critical thinking?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. So the full quote, I think it comes from Julian Simon, who is an economist. He said, "A wealth of information creates a poverty of attention." And this really hit home to me. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It was written 10 years ago, but it's Nassim Talbot's book, A Black Swan. And the way he framed it up is, you know what a wealth of information is? It's when you're watching a financial news network and they've got the ticker symbols and they've got 5 talking heads and they're all blabbering on about where the stock market is going. And his advice was, turn that shit off. Just turn the volume down. That you're not getting any new information. What you can do then, and I like this as a metaphor for silence and thinking. It is absolutely incredible or imperative that today's business leaders take time to have what I call a closed door policy. Close your door and just think. I mean, read about 1 or 2 things. We were just talking about blockchain. If you don't know what blockchain is, do a Google search and put blockchain and your industry in it and see what articles come up. Read 1 or 2 of those articles and then think about what that might mean for your business model. Who are the people who are working on it? Are there competitors you need to be aware of? Might there be an innovative partner that you want to reach out to and begin exploring how it might help you transform your business? Might there be a small pilot project you want to undertake? But the way, and I speak so much on technological change, and after I'm done with my presentations, the audience feels as though I've opened up a fire hose on them. It feels like all of this change is coming at them simultaneously, which in some sense it is. But in silence, you can take a breath and understand this. And this is I love paradoxes. When is the future created? By its very nature, the future can only be created in the present. So business leaders have to step back, think, try and spend some time on asking a better question. What is it a threat? Is it an opportunity? Is it a change in business? What's the best question? Then once you feel as though you found that best question, then begin focusing on some potential actions to address your question. So as I always say it, I sum it up in 7 words as a leader: give up on answers, stick with questions. That's your primary responsibility. But to do that, you need to think and you need silence to do that.
Yeah, I think that rings really well with sort of my background in design thinking and service design, because there's so much in my work that I do that actually just goes back to looking at the problem and figuring out if someone describes the problem in the right way, because it's a first step towards the solution. It's also should be your main focus, to find out more about what problem are you actually looking at and what part of that problem do you want to help solve as an organization. What's your purpose here? And I think a lot of companies seem to miss stepping actually all the way back and going, hang on a second, what was the problem we wanted to solve in the first place? Because now all this other stuff is around. How can we do this differently?
Yeah.
And in that case, maybe a bit of a contentious question, but that I like to ask more often than not is, if there are so many things out there. There's a lot of technology things out there, but we know we have to solve people's problems. And there's a lot of specialists out there that are very comfortable within their own vertical. And as you said previously, things are exponential. It's not just about building these platforms and using those tools in the right way to enable things, but actually interconnecting them. And through interconnection, like with the example of Uber, that's where the next things are, where progress is. So therefore, how much do we really still need specialists that are looking at these very vertical things, and how much do we need maybe jacks of all trades or these connector types of people that think differently in this in these liminal spaces?
Yeah, it's another wonderful question. And one of the things that I've really come to learn over the last 20 years working in this field is that there are so many incredibly bright, intelligent people. But what's the one thing really smart people don't know? Well, they don't know what they don't know. And I mean, that sounds a little flippant and obvious, but it is why they all miss the future. And look, I'm not pointing fingers. I actually direct this back on myself. I've been in this field, as I said, for 20 years. And 20 years ago, some of the things that I was thinking would happen or were definite shoo-ins, they didn't happen. And I'm like, rather than try and dismiss it, I said to myself, where was I wrong? Where did I have an assumption, a bias? How do I then correct that? And the reason you hear me write so much more in the book about humility is I've had to learn that lesson the hard way, that there are a lot of things that I simply wasn't aware of. I didn't know about, but I didn't take that into consideration. And so I think we can't afford to simply listen to experts. Or if we do, let's listen to those who truly demonstrate humility, who have an open mind, who are willing to listen to different and divergent voices and give those voices a seat at the table. And that, I kind of like that metaphor, a seat at the table. This does not mean that you have to always listen to these different, or you don't always have to heed what these different voices are saying, but you do have to listen to them because they're going to challenge your assumptions. They might provide you an insight. They might show you where your knowledge is deficient. And I don't include this in the book, but I don't know how you operate with your viewers, but years ago I developed something, I called it my unlearning curve. And it's 25 questions that I constantly ask myself around this idea of challenging my assumptions, recognizing what I don't know, listening to different voices. And I'd be happy to share it with you, and you could push it out to your viewership as well.
Yeah, we'd be more than happy to include that in the show notes. It's exactly the kind of content that our viewership and our listeners love to be able to get access to, because we keep promising them and we want to deliver on actionable insights, and those kind of tools are great.
Okay.
I've got one kind of wrap-up question. You started at the beginning of the show talking about the rate of change is what you're trying to pass along to leaders, that it's not slowing down. The rate of change is speeding up. And I'm going to get a little bit political, and we'll see if we can navigate through it. If you look at what's happening in America, they're wanting to go back to the 70s. If you look at what happened with Brexit, kind of going back to the 80s, and the general feeling is the public wasn't necessarily okay with all of this change. B, didn't necessarily say, well, there was some change. It didn't necessarily have a direct benefit to me, and I'd really rather go back. And there are some people, I'm going to go really out on a limb here. There was an article in The Guardian that said that David Cameron pushing through gay marriage in the UK was before the public was ready for it. And as a result, they put the referendum to the public in order to get the Tory party to come back from UKIP. I mean, this whole rate of change is happening, and yet the public, our customers, our team members may not be ready for it. How as leaders do we kind of say, whether you're liking it or not, it's happening?
Yeah, I will tell you that, I talk about exponential change, but the one thing that is not changing exponentially is people, humans. We just don't change that rapidly. And the way I've framed it recently is 100 years ago, even 50 years ago, change was almost universally viewed as progress. But now change is not viewed as progress, and that frightens a lot of people. And I think here's a counter trend, and it's one that I'm trying to spend more time thinking about myself, as I've had to step out of just this technological prism. And one of the really powerful trends I see out there is people's clamoring for community. And I spent a year at Durham University up in northern England, and I loved going to the pubs. But and what I like going to in the U.S. are micro breweries. And 20 years ago, I don't think if I was asked to predict the future of the beer industry, I probably would have said, oh, the big guys are just going to get bigger. They're going to get economies of scale, and the world's going to be controlled by Anheuser-Busch, Miller, Heineken, Corona, whatever. I wouldn't have been predicting the extraordinary growth of the microbrewery industry. And what I was missing was, one, really good products, high quality, but it is people like the sense of community. They like supporting businesses in their community. And I think one of the challenges for leaders is to say, look, how do we begin leveraging technology to really create a sense of community? And this is where I want to tie it back, Troy, to your work on blockchain. Blockchain, to me, 100 years ago, at least in the US, cooperatives were a very powerful business model. They helped farmers, they helped bring electrification, and blockchain has a way to begin allowing communities to reorient themselves to truly human values. I mean, I think the thing that's ultimately going to disrupt the disruptors, the Amazons of the world, is blockchain technology. And so I think the other thing to say on this front is when you think about the future, so many people have just this dystopian view of the future. It's Black Mirror. It's, everyone has this dystopian view. From my perspective, technology's ability to begin addressing climate change, renewable energy, transportation, affordable housing, preventative health care are all real. And that is an incredibly beautiful and powerful future. But we have to recognize the reason we're doing that is we want to help people, real people, and we want to leave a better world for our grandchildren and our great-great-great-grandchildren, I would argue. So I'm not sure if I answered your question or if I was just rambling there.
Well, I think it's a really, really a good answer, and I appreciate you putting effort into it. And I think the rate of change will continue. People are not necessarily ready for it, but we can look as leaders to help people move along with it and frame it correctly. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Marcus. Sorry, you were going to say?
Yeah, I guess if I could just say one thing. The reason I'm really optimistic about the future is as long as there are problems, and there are no shortage of wicked problems in this world, there are going to be opportunities. And we have an opportunity to leverage business to address many of those shortcomings. It might not be the way we've always done it. If I could just leave one recommendation for you, try and get Kate Raworth, the author of Donut Economics, on your program. She is fundamentally rethinking economics in a way that is truly sustainable, not just for the short term, but for the long term. And I think it's a real trend that leaves me optimistic about business's role in creating a better world for all of us, but doing it within the constraints of the planet.
We'll definitely take that recommendation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So, and I think it's a great sort of hopeful conversation to wrap up on. And and commenting quickly on the donut economics, I think, we had in our third episode our friend Graham Boyd, who's just launched his book with a brand new cover and everything, that we had on a few months ago. And he's talking as well about new purposes and new models for organizations. So I think it's a great way to finish this interview. It's the last episode we're recording still in 2020. So, and it will go live. It will already be 2021, which also explains Troy's headgear today. So, Jack, thank you so much for your time, for the amazing insights. The book is so quotable. It's brilliant, and thank you for being with us.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you, and Happy New Year.
Thank you.
You've been listening to The Wicked Podcast with co-host Marcus Kirsch and me, Troy Norcross.
Please subscribe on Podomatic, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find all relevant links in the show notes. Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section and let us know about any books for future episodes.
You can also get in touch with us directly on Twitter on @WickedandBeyond or @Troy_Norcross. Also, learn more about the Wicked Company book and the Wicked Company project at wickedcompany.com.